This video is brought to you by Ground News. For the past few weeks, headlines in the US have been dominated by the One Big Beautiful Bill, the 1,000-plus page mega bill crammed with essentially all of Trump's campaign pledges that narrowly passed the House of Representatives last month. It was the primary cause of the Trump-Musk spat. It's triggered a surprising amount of pushback from a Republican Party that's usually pretty pliant to Trump's wishes, and more recently, the White House has been claiming that it's the solution to the unrest in Los Angeles. Nonetheless, at over 1,000 pages, you'd be forgiven for not quite knowing all the details. So, in this video, we thought we'd take a look at what's actually in the BBB, as it's since become known, and why it's causing so much consternation in the MAGA world.
Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell.
So the way we're going to structure this video is by looking at the key bits of the BBB and then explaining how each of these bits upsets a different part of the Republican coalition. The first and probably the most important part of the BBB are the tax cuts, most significantly the planned extension of Trump's 2017 cuts. These include cuts to both corporation and income tax, as well as an increase to family tax credits, which were first introduced by Trump in 2017 via the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Most of the income tax cuts were supposed to expire in 2025, and most of the corporation and business tax cuts were supposed to expire in 2028, but the BBB would make these cuts permanent, and also include some of the more gimmicky tax cuts that Trump promised during the campaign, like no tax on tips or overtime. Unsurprisingly, these tax cuts haven't gone down well with anyone who's worried about America's ever-growing debt burden, including Elon Musk and the few remaining fiscal hawks in the Republican Party, like House Representative Thomas Massie and Senator Rand Paul. For context, the US is already running a pretty massive deficit of about $2 trillion a year, or about 6% of GDP, and the Non-Partisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that, in its current form, the BBB would add $3.1 trillion to the national debt over the next 10 years, and $5.1 trillion if the nominally temporary tax cuts, like the no tax on tips and overtime, are extended. And this seems pretty likely, given that's exactly what happened with Trump's 2017 tax cuts. Now, Trump might have gotten away with this in a more favourable fiscal environment, but with bond markets already showing signs of stress and US borrowing costs somewhat elevated, at least some Republicans are understandably anxious about issuing trillions of dollars worth of treasuries. The second bit of the BBB that's causing some upset in the GOP are the budget cuts. To offset at least some of the tax cuts, the BBB also includes more than $1.5 trillion worth of budget cuts over the next 10 years, with about $900 billion of these due to come from the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Now, this might sound relatively innocuous, but for reasons we don't fully understand, the Energy and Commerce Committee oversees federal spending on Medicaid, i.e. federal health insurance for low-income Americans, and Medicare, i.e. federal health insurance for older Americans, which together account for the vast majority of the committee's overall budget. This means that, in practice, finding $900 billion in savings will require cuts to one of these two programs, and more likely Medicaid than Medicare. While senior Republicans have insisted this won't require cuts per se, and that $900 billion in savings can just be achieved by cracking down on waste, fraud and abuse, or fiddling with eligibility criteria, this isn't plausible, and the Congressional Budget Office estimates that the BBB will result in nearly 11 million people losing health insurance coverage over the next decade, despite the fact that the Trump administration has ruled out cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security on numerous occasions. Anyway, this hasn't gone down well with, basically any senator in a swing seat seeking re-election in 2026, but it's gone down especially poorly with what we might call the pro-Labour wing of the GOP, who generally try to align themselves more with Main Street than Wall Street, and are perhaps most clearly represented by Senator Josh Hawley, who said he will vote against the BBB if it involves any cuts to benefits. The third bit of the BBB worth mentioning is the changes to energy policy. In its current form, the BBB would rescind billions of dollars for the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, Biden-era legislation that introduced massive subsidies and tax credits for domestic investments in renewable energy and nuclear power, amongst other things. This includes, for instance, a $15 tax credit for each megawatt hour of electricity generated by nuclear power, and an astonishingly generous $30 tax credit for each megawatt hour of electricity generated by renewables. Combined with other provisions, the IRA reduces the cost of solar projects in the US by about 60%, which is why American solar production has skyrocketed since its implementation. To be fair to Trump here, the IRA is expensive. While the White House originally claimed it would only cost $370 billion over 10 years, Goldman Sachs estimates it will be more like $1 trillion, thanks in large part to the open-ended subsidies. Unsurprisingly, Trump's changes haven't gone down well with climate-minded liberals, but it has also upset Republican senators in states experiencing IRA-induced manufacturing booms in clean energy. Iowa's Chuck Grassley, for instance, has said he wants to keep the IRA's provisions for wind power. North Dakota's John Hoeven wants to keep the provisions for geothermal, and West Virginia's Shelley Moore Capito wants to keep ones for hydrogen. The fourth bit of the BBB causing some consternation is Section 899. We've actually done a full video on this, so go and watch that if you want to know more, but the TLDR is that Section 899 is a proposed measure that would allow the US to increase federal taxes on foreigners from countries deemed to be imposing unfair taxes. This has upset Wall Street Republicans, who worry that it could further erode America's status as a safe haven for international finance. The fifth and final bit of the BBB we think worth mentioning are the immigration-related provisions. Most notably, the BBB includes an additional $45 billion for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, to build new detention facilities, another $14 billion for deportation operations, and billions more to hire an additional 10,000 new agents by 2029. There's then another $50 billion allocated for the construction of a new border wall, and immigrants hoping to claim asylum or otherwise seek relief through immigration courts will face a host of new fees that advocates say may keep them out of the country altogether. Now, this is basically the one bit of the BBB that Republicans can actually agree on, which is why White House advisor Stephen Miller spent most of Tuesday evening arguing on X that the BBB was, quote, the most essential piece of legislation currently under consideration in the entire Western world in generations, because it would, quote, increase by orders of magnitude the scope, scale, and speed of removing illegal and criminal aliens from the United States. Equally, this might partly explain why Trump has apparently proved so keen to pick a fight with California recently, and why he's tried to frame it around immigration. If he can redirect both voters and the GOP's attention away from the deficit towards immigration, the BBB will have a better chance of passing. If you want to know more about this topic, there's plenty of other outlets reporting about this online. Unfortunately, it's sometimes hard to tell exactly which way these outlets lean politically, making it difficult to understand exactly how your view of world events is being biased by the sources you're reading. That's where this week's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. Their website and app, developed by a former NASA engineer, allows us to pull back the curtain on media bias and have a look at exactly how each story has been covered. For instance, this story about Trump winning the House vote to cancel billions in funding for NPR, PBS, and various aid initiatives has been covered by 167 sources. We know that more than 47 of these have been reported by the left, and 33 of these have been reported by the right. That's not all though. Ground News has tons of genuinely useful features. Take their blind spots feed, for instance. This shows you stories underreported by one side of the political spectrum or the other. For example, if you lean left, you probably missed this story on the FBI arresting a man accused of handing out riot gear during LA's anti-ICE protests. Here at TLDR News, we think that Ground News is an incredibly useful tool for our current media landscape, one that is constantly trying to attract your attention and sway you towards or away from certain political viewpoints. Having a tool that helps you spot this and helps you take action really is a game changer. If you're interested in everything that Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage Plan subscription by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. This limited time offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.